Hi, everyone. Welcome to Life Edge, because life just shouldn't be mediocre. Today, we are back. Susan couldn't make it today. She was out and about somewhere, and she'll be back probably in September. She may be back at the end of the month. This is her time off before school starts again. And we've got a great guest today with Dr. Ed Stuart. And Harold Muliati is joining me today. He's also running the video switcher and audio mixer. Here we go. This show is sponsored by Relate Corporation at www.relate.com, your training and video partner. And we are back, and in that center position of power, we've got Dr. Ed Stuart from Northeastern Illinois University. And how are you, Ed?
Good. Great to be back.
Glad to have you back. I'm sorry I missed you on the last one. I was traveling. I was in England. We were talking pre-show a little bit. So, when I look at the list, oh darn, he's on right when I'm gone. Wanted to see you, and I never did get to follow up with you on the Russia trip. But you're going back, from what I hear.
Yes, I'm leading a group of former students and staff from Northeastern Illinois University. We're leaving on September the 19th. And we're doing a good bit of the Trans-Siberian Express, starting in Irkutsk on the eastern side of Russia, and then going by train through Novosibirsk and Ekaterinburg, and eventually, hopefully, ending up in Moscow.
Wow, that's an exciting trip. The Trans-Siberian Railway, that's fraught with adventure and stories and everything else. Have you ever been on it?
Yes, actually, 20 years ago in 1998, I took my mother. I had been teaching in Russia in 94, and so one of the things she had always wanted to do was the Trans-Siberian Express. Actually, she wanted to do it so she could impress her bridge friend ladies and drop a trip that they had, the ladies had been to Hawaii or Cancun, and so she could say, well, I just got off the Trans-Siberian Express, so that would kind of one up the rest of the girls, as they say. So we actually flew, we met in Seattle and then flew from Seattle through Anchorage and then landed in Khabarovsk, which is on the Pacific. And so took the Trans-Siberian from Khabarovsk, made our first stop in Irkutsk because my mother wanted to dip her toes in Lake Baikal, which is the deepest and largest freshwater lake in the world. And then because I had taught in Ekaterinburg, I wanted to show her where I had been teaching and introduce her to some of my friends, and then take her to the opera in Ekaterinburg. One of the things that's true still of Russian cities is that they might be kind of grimy and industrial and rather bleak, but they always have some kind of, as my grandfather would say, gingerbread architecture opera house that's quite elaborate and very, very well supported. And you see the operas of Tchaikovsky and the great Italians and of course Russian symphony and piano music, Shostakovich and Rachmaninoff, and so it's quite a contrast. That's what Russia is. Russia is the most. That's the one word if you were going to describe Russia, it's contrast from the really, really kind of primitive, and then you have this ultra sophisticated or cultured arts and music at the other end.
Yeah, it is interesting. And we have friends that live in Yoshkar-Ola, which is about 500 miles northeast of Russia, not too far from the Volga River. And I saw videos. I haven't been there. They keep inviting us. One day we will go. I saw some videos of the city, and it's absolutely gorgeous. It's a beautiful, I think there's maybe 50,000 people or something like that. And just lovely place. The river, there's a river that runs through it, and then there's a Volga, which is probably about 20 miles outside of it. But it just looks gorgeous, and I don't I don't know if the Trans-Siberian goes through that part or that's still further north. It may be a little bit north, but they have a 12 to 14 hour ride from there to Moscow if they don't take a small, and they're not too far from a city called Kazan, which is a Muslim city about 125 miles south of Yoshkar-Ola, and that's where the major airport is in that area. And the Olympics were there when they had them. Part of the the FIFA World Cup was there, part of it. And
Kazan is on the Trans-Siberian, because when I would go back and forth from Moscow to Ekaterinburg, we would go through Kazan because it's a major city. It's on the Volga.
Interesting.
It has that combination of Russian Orthodox and Islamic culture that, again, one of the things that maybe a lot of people don't know is that there is quite a large Islamic population in Russia, more so in the days of the Soviet Union, when the republics of Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan were part of the Soviet Union. But there are still a lot of Islamic peoples and observers that are part of the Russian Federation today.
Interesting. Yeah, it's an interesting world. Now, the friends we have there, I know probably about 30, 40 people from that city. They remind me of us in the maybe 60s. They're not quite here. They're more 60s, maybe 70s, but no more than that. And yet they're nice folks. They're very warm. Once you befriend them, they're like friends for life. They're really a nice people. Now, I heard Moscow's different. It's a little more, it's like New York. It's very fast moving and a lot of activity and lots of crime and all the good things. They have the good and the bad. And then St. Petersburg, everybody says, is absolutely gorgeous. That's probably the center of culture.
Although I may be a bit odd, Rick, but I prefer Moscow to St. Petersburg.
Oh, really?
St. Petersburg is kind of like a museum, or it's kind of like their Disneyland. They have the Winter Palace and the Hermitage and the canals, but it's kind of like preserved in aspic or amber, and it's not so lively. Moscow is a little bit more. That's where the action is. It's in the center of the Soviet Union. I'm also, and this is also maybe a bit macabre, I'm a big fan of cemeteries. My favorite place in Paris is Père Lachaise Cemetery. I always go visit Oscar Wilde's grave in Paris. And in Moscow, there's a fantastic cemetery that's next to a convent, the Novodevichy convent. And I've been there many times, but I just learned the last time I was there that Novodevichy is the Russian word for new virgins.
Interesting.
It's where the czars put their first wife when they were ready to take the second or the third wife, whatever. And it's where Chekhov is buried. It's where Khrushchev is buried. And now it's where Yeltsin has a very impressive grave there, and Mrs. Gorbachev. And then the Moscow River, it kind of snakes through Moscow, and you can take a boat. It's kind of like a water taxi. And the Kremlin is maybe the most impressive square I've ever been to in the world. So it's my favorite city in Russia by far.
Now you've seen Russia change from when you went originally to now. Yes. Would you say it's a pretty dramatic change?
And the biggest changes in Moscow. A lot of it had to do with what you were just talking about, the World Cup.
Yes.
The subway in Moscow and St. Petersburg. And when I first took the subway in St. Petersburg, it was taking the subway in Leningrad. I tell my students now, I'm so old, I've been to the Soviet Union. The subways were one of the show places of the Soviet Union. It was one of their things that they were the most proud of. So the subways have always been somewhat ornate, but now they're a little more. I have like a debit card or little electric card that you use on the subway, and not the little tokens that you used to use.
Yep.
The signage is now in English and in Russian.
Interesting.
Street architecture and infrastructure is fairly modern. The railways, they have new equipment on the railways.
Okay.
I was there in October doing a little scouting, and one of the things that's changed, at least in some places, and the biggest change from the Soviet Union, there's some attempt at customer service.
Okay. Interesting.
On the railroad that I was taking from Ekaterinburg to Moscow, people actually came in, railroad staff, and asked me how I was doing and was I satisfied and did I have any requests, as opposed to the good old days of the Soviet Union when you were just lucky that they didn't throw you off the train. And
I remember seeing news stories about that, like employees getting trained to smile and stuff like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. They actually smile now. And the other thing, I was talking to my godson actually last night, and he's planning. He's a sophomore in college and rather adventurous and interested in economics and Russia and so forth. And he's planning his own individual trip on the Trans-Siberian. And one of the things I said that was very different now is that you can eat the food and it won't kill you.
I've heard that. Yeah.
The food is quite good. Now it's real Russian food. You get beef stroganoff and you get borscht and you get pelmeni dumplings and nice salad and so forth. So it's a little bit more customer friendly. And of course in Moscow now they have, strangest thing is there's a building in Moscow that was a hotel, the Hotel Moscow, and it's the building that the architecture is different on two sides. And the story goes that the construction minister was submitting the architectural designs to Stalin, and he had two sets of designs, and he forgot which one Stalin preferred. So he said, "Well, the only thing to do is to put one half of the building in one style and the other half of the building in the other style."
Hedging his bets to stay alive.
Yeah, exactly. That was portfolio balanced, much for real risk aversion. And after the fall of the Soviet Union, for a bit it was the home of the Duma, the Russian parliament.
Oh, okay.
But now it has been transformed. It's the Four Seasons Hotel.
Interesting.
And I've always been impressed with Mo and Izzy Sharp, the two guys that started the Four Seasons chain. In 1998 or 1999, they built a Four Seasons in Prague, or they redid a couple of buildings. And as you were saying, one of the things they had to do, always in former socialist countries, was teach people how to smile.
Yes.
And the Four Seasons, which is a lovely hotel chain based in Toronto, and there's actually two Four Seasons hotels in Chicago, and the service is fantastic. The service in Prague, whereas every other hotel I'd ever been in Prague, the personnel were kind of surly and Soviet, whatever. People at the Four Seasons in Prague, this is way back in the late 90s, not that soon after the fall of the communist system. They were just like the people in Toronto or the Four Seasons in Chicago or Wailea, and the people at the Four Seasons in Moscow are the same. But I must say, I'm just a poor professor, so I don't stay at Four Seasons. I go in there to have a beer, right, and enjoy the ambience for an hour or so until my beer is finished and they kick me out. But even the tourist 3-star hotels in Moscow, the personnel is quite civilized, and the other thing is that they tend to be very, very young, because I'm sure you've heard this story, but when McDonald's opened their very first restaurant, in the Soviet Union. McDonald's had a restaurant in Moscow on Pushkinskaya Square in Moscow, and their first rule of hiring was that they wouldn't take anybody who had ever worked in a Soviet restaurant.
Oh, how interesting.
Because they would have to unlearn so much and change their behavior. So naturally, most of the employees were 18, 19, 20 years old and had never worked in a restaurant, and that therefore they were trainable and could be taught kind of consumer-friendly policies and so forth. I always tell my students one of my favorite stories about the Soviet Union is that quite often in the Soviet Union, restaurants would close for lunch and dinner so the employees wouldn't be disturbed by customers.
I love it.
And so that's a transformation, right? The hardest thing to transform in any situation, and you know this better than anybody, Rick, the hardest thing to transform is people, right? You can transform buildings, you can transform computers, technology, that's pretty easy. The hardest thing, and sometimes it's impossible, that after a certain pattern of behavior, you can't transform them. So I think that's the biggest thing.
You know, it's funny
going on.
And it's funny you say that, because the people we know in Yoshkar-Ola, Russia, they run a company called iSpring, which makes very good software for training and learning. It works out of PowerPoint, and it's a great add-on for PowerPoint and other tools that they have. And we met them at all the shows in Las Vegas and stuff. And I trained their owner and some other people on how to behave in a trade show, because they would sit there at the trade show.
That's exactly right.
And I go, guys, you're not even smiling. We don't smile. Problem.
Smile.
When you come out here, if you're not smiling, you're considered unfriendly, unhelpful, and nobody trusts you.
Yeah.
And he was making German Shepherd faces like, But you know what? I worked with him for 2 days straight. He took a lot of notes. How to at one point. Now he's 6'5". He's a big guy. Yeah, and he's the owner. And I said, how do you get people in the booth? He goes, well, I stand in the middle. And he just stands up. And I go, you look like Sasquatch. You're scaring people. And so then we trained, and he went up to an ATD, which is the Association for Training and Development, and they used to be ASTD. And they went to the Technology show, and they won most congenial booth. I couldn't believe that.
Wow.
He went and trained everybody with what we talked about, trained them all. And they won the most congenial and helpful booth. And it's been like that ever since. They got it. And I would even talk to the younger girls there and say, you don't smile much. And they go, we don't smile in Russia. I go, you need to smile more. And now they look beautiful. They smile all the time. And in fact, the owner of the company, he would have them, like, for example, the girls, they're very pretty women. He would have them dressed like with the high top like this, the shirts up here. They look very Mormonish, white and black pants or skirts, and just very serious. And these are 20-something-year-old girls. I go, why do you make them look like they're 40? He goes, they need to look professional. I go, Yuri, you're in the U.S. now. They look just very scared, and they don't look conservative. They just look very unhappy. So next day they came down with their hair down. The booth was full. The girls were pretty, and everybody showed up, and they're asking for information, literature, this and that. And now he just lets them be however they want to be, just look professional, and that's it. And but you're right, it's such a cultural difference, the smiling versus the non-smiling. They're not overtly emotional.
Right. And that the behavior before, the non-smiling, the kind of reclusive behavior, that was rational behavior. It was not because they were dumb or because they were unemotional, basically, or whatever. That in the Soviet Union, if you stood out, you were going to be in trouble. If you smiled, then maybe you were doing something wrong, right? That the most important behavioral principle was to not get noticed, right?
And not be happy. You can't be happy.
Keep your head down. No, if you were happy, then you were doing something wrong, right? And that you would do everything in your power to look the same, to dress the same. And when I was teaching in Ekaterinburg back in the 90s, everybody was named Tanya or Victor or Nikolai.
Right.
And it was explained to me that you did not want an odd name because that would lead you to be picked out, right? So everybody had not only the same look, but the same name and the same demeanor, and you had to be part of the crowd. If you stuck out, then that was a very risky kind of behavior.
Now, is that why they use nicknames so much? Because they only had this small pool of names, so instead they have like different nicknames?
No, it goes back before that.
Okay.
Nicknames are the level of familiarity. Like, so if we were in Russia, I would at first talk to Rick as Richard, right? And then it would be Rick, and then we would go to Ricky, right? And it's the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
My family does not know me as Dr. Edward F. Stuart. They don't know me as Ed. They don't know me as Eddie, right? And my mother knows me as Eddie Boy. So it's the same thing. So, I mean, you read, one of the difficulties of reading Tolstoy, reading War and Peace or Anna Karenina, is there are 5 names for the same guy, right?
Yeah. You're right. And it is tricky when you're first reading, you're going, wait a minute, are we talking this?
It's like,
it is the same thing.
Who's Sasha? I thought it was Alexander. Well, Sasha is the nickname for Alexander. And then,
it's interesting. Well, I wish more of us would travel to other parts of the world to see how they live and how they behave. And the cultures are so different in so many ways. And there's good and bad in all cultures. But I find the Russians on the whole very friendly and just fairly nice people. You have to kind of know where they're coming from. They have different ways of looking at things. And, like trademarks and stuff. They don't care about stuff like that. It's almost like Brazil. They're in a different planet when it comes to copyrights and everything. But it's an interesting people and very, very, I find them to be very kind.
Like you said, Rick, once you make a friend there, you have a friend for life. They're very, very hospitable, very warm, very helpful. And also, one of the things I try to do with the groups that I take is make sure they know a little bit about where they're going and know a little bit about Russian history, know a little bit about, who the czars were and the history of the Soviet Union and a few things like that. And one of the things that Americans need to know and still know, because it's important, is that in World War II, the American Army and Navy and Marines won the war in the Pacific. But in Europe, it was the Soviet Army, it was the Red Army that defeated Hitler. Right. We didn't go there until June of '44 when we went in with Tom Hanks to save Private Ryan. But we were there fighting for about 9 or 10 months. The Russians were fighting for 5 or 6 years and lost 30 million people. So they're still, when you go to Russia, one of the things you see is war memorials and old generals. It just reminded me, Rick, one of the other transformations, one of the things you see in Moscow now and other Russian cities is the Russian Orthodox Church.
Yes.
Big statues of saints, new cathedrals. In Ekaterinburg, where I taught in the 90s, Ekaterinburg was infamous because that's where Nicholas II and Alexandra and all of their children were slaughtered by the Bolsheviks in 1918. And in a house, in a merchant's house, the Ipatiev house, which was something of a shrine for a while for people who were monarchists. And when Boris Yeltsin was the head of the local Soviet Communist Party in Ekaterinburg, he had that house torn down. And so when I was there in the 90s, it was just an empty field that occasionally a makeshift little wooden cross would be planted in the ground and somebody anonymously would leave a little bouquet of flowers. Well, today, if you go to Ekaterinburg, there is a Russian Orthodox cathedral that, in my estimate, had to have cost $50 to $100 million. A huge structure of marble and glass and brass, and so that's one of the things that the Putin government has done. That it doesn't have. They've lost the authority of Marx and Lenin, and now they need the authority of Saint Gregory and the ancient czars and the Russian Orthodox faith.
That's very interesting. And you know, my friend in Russia, on weekends he sometimes goes to local squares and starts teaching people history. He says, we were a great people once, and we can be that again. Yes. And he just talks about the history, because a lot of that was not taught for many years. He says it was gone.
Exactly.
And you know, and a lot of them I've talked to say we're not religious yet. We're learning, because they were never. There was no religion when they were growing up, and now they're kind of learning and saying, do we want to be religious? We don't know. We're learning. We're experimenting. It's interesting. It's a different way of life. Now, you were also recently in Austria, right when the government collapsed.
Yes, I hope I'm trying to maintain that it was not cause and effect, that I showed up to keep there and the government collapsed 3 weeks after I landed in Austria. But that's what happened, right? So we live in this time now of conspiracy theories, right?
That's true.
Something happened, and then something happened after, and therefore they're related. But I think the fact that the Austrian government collapsed had nothing to do with me. It did have to do, surprisingly enough, with Russia, right?
Yes.
Because the government, which collapsed in the last week of May this year, it was a center-right government. There were two parties. The main party, the party that gave the government the chancellor, Sebastian Kurz, a young man, he's only 32 years old, and he was the leader of the Austrian People's Party, the OVP, which was the party of your Governor Schwarzenegger, right? So a kind of center-right party, roughly equivalent to the good old days of the Republican Party of say, Dwight Eisenhower, that kind of conservative. And their coalition party was the Freedom Party, the FPO, which is a very right-wing party, very anti-immigrant, anti-EU, anti-foreigner, and a pro-Putin party. In fact, the foreign minister, one of the kind of scandals, she invited Putin to her wedding, and he came to her wedding, and they not only danced together, but at the end of the dance, she bowed to him, and there were pictures of this. And so there was this. That's what kind of is surprising, to go off a little bit of tangent, to see the current Republican Party in the United States being so pro-Putin and pro-Russian. I think I'm older than you are, Rick, but I grew up in the 50s and 60s when the Russians were worse than the evil empire, right? There were Russians going to take over everything. And the most anti-Russian, anti-Soviet party in the world was the Republican Party of Richard Nixon and the great, and I'm putting air quotes here, Joe McCarthy, and there were Russians in the State Department and so forth. So right-wing parties that's another transformation, have flip-flopped from being completely anti-Russian to being very pro-Putin. Well, anyway, somebody in opposition to this right-of-center, far-right government set up a trap on the island of Ibiza, right, where a lot of Austrians go for vacation, right? And so the Austrian vice chancellor, Mr. Straka, one of the leaders of the Freedom Party, the far right-wing party, he was in this villa in Ibiza, and he was introduced to this woman who was an actress, but he thought she was some kind of Russian oligarch or the wife of a Russian oligarch, and whoever set this up, some opposition politicians or media or something, they had 3 or 4 hidden cameras, 7 hidden microphones, and this woman, so she's on video and audio, clear for everybody to hear.
It was very good audio and video too.
Very good audio and video. It's crystal clear. And she's offering him money for his campaign. She's offering to buy the primary right-wing newspaper and turn it from supporting the OVP into supporting the FPO. And he's promising her that if they do this, he is going to give road building contracts to this Russian construction company that she supposedly owns, right? Now, this is all set up. He thinks it's real, right? And so I think this was, I'm not exactly sure. There's some documentation in Austrian press and the German press. This was actually done in February or March, but they had to get the editing and the sound and everything to be presentation quality, and then they released it, I think the 3rd weekend in May, and within a week, Mr. Straka resigned, and then because Kurz, the leader of the OVP, the Chancellor Party, had picked him, his support, he lost a
well, he also refused to do anything about him. He sort of ignored the whole thing, and that brought him down.
Oh, this will blow over. You're right, exactly. Yeah. So there was so much heat, and there was a vote in Parliament. Again, I was nearby, but I had nothing to do with this. Right? There was a vote in Parliament of no confidence, and so Austria has kind of a system. Like European parliamentary systems, where there's a chancellor or a prime minister who runs the government, and then there's somebody else who's the head of state, like Queen Elizabeth in England, the federal president in Germany, and so forth. So the federal president of Austria, a very nice old man, 75, he's even older than I am, so you know he's an old man, Alexander van der Bellen, who's a Green Party person, had to appoint a kind of caretaker government. So there's a new parliamentary election scheduled in Austria in September, I believe. And so it's a kind of free-for-all now because it's a parliamentary system like the German system that has proportional voting. So there are 5 or 6 different parties that can have representatives in parliament, and then you build coalitions if there's no majority and so forth. So that's what's going on in Austria. And after the government collapsed, I left and came back to Chicago. So
mission accomplished, right?
Mission accomplished, right?
Wait,
yes.
So how are they being run until the parliamentary election?
Well, the president appointed a temporary chancellor who agreed. They do all this by written agreement, who agreed to serve as chancellor only until the next election, and agreed not to run and not to be a candidate. And the person he chose was the head of the Supreme Court, right? Who had been the head of the Supreme Court, who was a non-party, a non-political person, and someone who knows the law. So that's who's running Austria right now.
Yeah, so it sounds like he made a pretty good decision on that. Keep it nonpartisan, keep it kind of safe, and get through it. I mean, that doesn't happen often in Europe like that. I mean, that was pretty out of nowhere.
Yeah.
I love it. I remember back, and we're not too far from each other. I think you're a couple years older or whatever. I'm 65, so I remember growing up.
You look much
younger,
right? Yeah. I said you look much younger. You look a day over 39, right?
Lucky me, vitamins.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. I remember when they did the who was it? They did the thing with the Arabs who were selling something to some politician who, of course, bought it.
Oh yeah,
Abscam. That's what it was.
Yeah.
And you just kind of shake your head and go, and they've analyzed politicians, and they say when they have power, they forget they're touchable. They totally forget that. They think I'm beyond anybody coming after me. I control the world. And then they get arrested and they go, what happened? Wait a minute. Did you get the memo?
The Abscam guys got caught on, I think it was film at the time, with a suitcase full of money in a cheap hotel room. It's like, oh my God, what are you thinking?
Yeah. It's just like you just shake your head and go, really? I mean, just really?
Really? Yeah.
Especially in today's day and age. I love when they catch the evangelical guys, the TV evangelists who are caught with either women or this or that, and they go, I didn't do it. You're on film.
Yes, exactly.
It wasn't me.
Yeah.
Who was it?
Me, right. Yeah, exactly.
And you just go, they're lying while they're caught, or any of the current politicians, whatever, politicians on the whole. Now you can film them, record them, and they still deny it. And you just go, wow, that's chutzpah. I mean,
and you should know by now that we live in an age where everybody has a video camera because they've got a phone. And,
I know. It's amazing. It's amazing. Well, I don't know if I told you last time, but I was born in Argentina. My parents immigrated when I was 3 years old. I'm part Austrian. I have a little bit of Austrian in me on my dad's side. He was Northern Italian, and on his grandmother was part Austrian, was half Austrian. And my grandfather was Northern Italian, who probably looked French-Austrian too, because the border up in Northern Italy is very porous, very, very porous.
And that part of the Bolzano or Bozen, the Südtirol, Alto Adige, depending, was part of the Habsburg Empire and part of Austria until Woodrow Wilson drew his lines. And I remember an Italian Olympic skier. She won a medal or something like that, and one of the American sportscasters asked her if she spoke any foreign languages. And she says, foreign language I speak is Italian. Because her native language was, and of course that caused a big brouhaha in Italy because here she was representing Italy, but her native language was German.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, Trieste was the Habsburg seaport, which is now part of Italy and the most important coffee city in Central Europe.
Yeah, it's interesting. So on my mom's side, German-Hungarian, and they came from Slovenia.
Part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire.
And they were Slovenian basically with passports when they went to Argentina. And
so you could be related to Melania Trump.
I mean, maybe somewhere.
She's Slovenian,
And you never know. Slovenian was under Austrian rule for 200 years.
Yeah.
So, so I've got Austrian in me, and I just kind of wonder, and some German in me too. Prussian. I think my relatives were Prussian. Yeah. And so it's just interesting to see that. And most people don't know I'm from Argentina because they think I'm American. But no, I was born and raised, born and 3 years old, came up here and lived there for 3 years. From 1977 to 80, it was an interesting time. That was right when they had the military dictatorship, which threw out the Peronistas, which was a good thing. But I look at Argentina now, and from an economics point of view, if you read Argentina, you must probably not sleep at night. It's just an amazing disaster.
Their currency just dropped 30 or 40%
in one day.
So.
Jeez.
In one day, they went from 48, I think, up to 63. It's just mind-boggling. So, and a year and a half ago, it was about 15.
Yeah, I was telling some of my friends, it's time to run down to Buenos Aires with dollars and start buying up boxcars full of Malbec and beef.
It's probably very cheap right now.
Yes.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Actually, speaking of the old Austro-Hungarian Empire, when I was teaching in Salzburg in May, in Chicago, like California, it's a melting pot of all kinds of people, and I have students from all over the place. But for the first time in my entire teaching career, I had a student from the newly renamed Republic of North Macedonia.
Interesting.
Oh.
Because Macedonia, like Slovenia, like Croatia, like Serbia, like Kosovo, was part of the Yugoslav Republic.
Good old Tito.
And then, good old Tito.
He's the only one who kept everybody together.
You know, my student, Andre, said that the most impressive man to him in history was Tito because of what he kept together. And if you had to be in a socialist or a communist country anywhere in the world, you would pick Yugoslavia. Mm-hmm. It was relatively free. They had kind of a market-based economy. You could travel. There was a Yugoslav airline that had daily flights from Belgrade to Chicago in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Anyway, for your viewers, they might need to know this for Jeopardy or a trivia. What's now the Republic of North Macedonia, it changed its name January the 1st. Before that, its technical term was the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia.
Yeah.
And the reason they had to do that is that there's a district or some region of Greece, northern Greece, that's called Macedonia.
That's right.
And the Greeks did not want any place else called Macedonia because they were afraid, kind of like the Italians in northeastern Italy, that they were really Austrians and they might have gone with Austria had they been given a choice. Yeah. So the people in the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia wanted just to call their country Macedonia, and the Greeks have some leverage because the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia wants to be in the European Union. And any country who's in the European Union has a veto power. Yeah. So they negotiated this name, the Republic of North Macedonia, which the people in North Macedonia aren't happy with. And the people in Greece, they actually kicked out their previous government, the Syriza government of Tsipras, and they have a new government now. And the main campaign point was this name, that the former Greek government let the Macedonians call themselves Macedonia. And that was, how could you do that to our Greek brothers in Macedonia? So all of these, to us, it's a tempest in a teapot. Mm-hmm. They also, in North Macedonia, in Skopje, the capital, I know this is kind of trivia, but these things fascinate me. They had called their airport the Alexander the Great Airport.
Interesting.
He was in Macedonia.
Huh.
Yeah. Well, now it's not. Now it's the airport of North Macedonia. They had to give up Alexander the Great. They had to give it up. Yep. The Greeks.
Yeah. So was Alexander the Great from what's now North Macedonia, or was he from the Greek part of Macedonia now?
That I don't know. My knowledge stops there. And you would probably get an argument.
You would probably get an argument.
You know, you get a Greek Macedonian and a North Macedonian together, and they would both claim Alexander the Great for their own, and where he was born, and where the line was on, and all that. So, and like you said, Ruth, that's what makes travel fascinating, is all these little interesting stories that, like your relatives in the northeast of Italy. Yeah. There's, you could probably write 3 or 4 novels or biographies based on Hungarian, Slovenian, Northern Italian.
Yeah.
Right?
And they're all mixed in there.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me what my freshman sociology teacher at the University of Houston said many, many years ago. He said, if you're looking for racial purity, you're about 60,000 years too late.
That's so true. It's so true. And you know what? You never know what anybody is nowadays, because it's so melted. It's very rare to find anybody who's actually pure.
Right. Anything. Right.
So
not a bad
that's
thing
one
either,
of the things that
because it means
driving the business.
Oh, sorry.
You're right. That's driving the business model of Ancestry, 23andMe, all of those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, I did that Ancestry.com. I never got a result back ever. I don't exist. They're very scammy. But I know somebody who did it, and the person is Japanese descent. He's Japanese American. And when they got the result back, it said, "You're Asian." Guy goes, "Thanks. I really didn't know."
Well, I mean, imagine his surprise if he had come back Irish.
Yeah. You were probably too complicated, Rick, for them. Their computer couldn't handle all the various.
They probably wouldn't know what to do with it. Yep. I got nothing. Nothing. I go, gee, my mom did it too. She got nothing. Actually, the only thing she got is it linked her to me, which was weird. They found us, or they have the same name and they were born in. Okay, they must be related. So somehow we shared the same genetics according to that. Yeah. And that was it. There was no other info on either of us. I went, wow, that was really useless. Well, that was $100 badly spent.
You weren't adopted then?
I wasn't adopted, no. But that's,
I'm glad you said that, Rick, because I think there's a tinge of scam to those things as well. Like, they have a dartboard somewhere, and they say, "Okay, Rick, let's see, let's throw 5 darts and see what they hit." Oh, there's some. It hit the German dart. It hit the Italian circle and whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fun. Well, Ed, as always, it's a pleasure. We're already way past our time, but hey, we're having a good time.
Well, we started early anyway.
Yeah, we started early too, so we did a good show today. We did about almost 45 minutes. So that was great. You're way fun to have on, and you're a wealth of information and just a good person. We're glad. Yeah, you like coming back because we love having you come back, and
hopefully you'll have me back when and if I get back from Russia.
Oh, I'd love to hear. I'd love to hear that experience, especially with the students and everything. It's going to be fun.
Right. That's going to be fun. I'm looking forward to it. And
when you mentioned Irkutsk earlier, I thought Risk, the game of Risk. Most people never heard of Irkutsk unless they played Risk.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, well, hey, a great pleasure again having you on. Good luck on the trip. It's September you're going?
Yes, September 19th to the 1st of October. Yeah.
For about a month?
Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm.
That'll be great. So we look forward to seeing you when you come back. Give us a call when you're back, and we'll schedule you in. It'll be great to see you again. Yeah. And I think these sessions are great. I think people hopefully learn a little bit about what's out there that people don't know about. And if traveling is fun, and it is really educational in so many ways and enriching. So travel more out there. It's good for you. Ed, we'll see you next time. Safe travels, and thanks again for coming on the show.
My pleasure, Rick.
Take care, and we'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
And it's a wrap.